My name is Henrietta, and I'm 70 years old. I've learned that the smallest things can change your entire life. A missing pinch of salt, a bruise on your arm, a piece of paper you've kept hidden for 43 years. When my husband Walter died 5 years ago, I moved in with my son Lawrence. It seemed like the right thing. He'd bought a nice house in the suburbs. He had a wife, Patricia. He had a good job as a project manager at some construction company. I thought it would be nice to be near family, to help out in the kitchen, to feel useful again. What I didn't tell Lawrence, what I hadn't told anyone except George Adler, was that I owned 51% of the company where my son worked. Parkfield Construction. Walter and George had founded it together in 1981, right after they both left their corporate jobs with nothing but determination and a second-hand van. I watched Walter build that company from our kitchen table. I watched him come home covered in dust, with his collar stained dark from sweat, and I'd make him soup. Always homemade, always with love. When Walter died, the business went to me. His will was very clear. 51% was mine, 49% belonged to George, who had been his partner and his friend for more than 40 years. I asked George not to tell Lawrence. I wanted to see what my son would do without knowing his mother was watching. I wanted to see who he really was. I learned the answer on a Tuesday night in March, when the soup didn't have enough salt. Lawrence came home late from the office. He was tired. His shoulders were hunched. He sat down at the table without looking at me, and I placed a bowl in front of him. Broth with vegetables, tender meat that I'd simmered for hours. He took one spoonful, and his entire face changed. "This is under-seasoned," he said. Not a question, a statement of fact, delivered like an insult. I told him the salt shaker was on the table. I told him he could add what he liked. He didn't add salt. Instead, he looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen since he was a boy, and his father wouldn't let him have a second helping of dessert. Anger. Pure, untamed anger that had nowhere to go, so it turned toward the easiest target. He stood up. He took my arm, my left arm, the one I used to stir pots and fold linens and wave goodbye to grandchildren I'd never had. And he squeezed. Not a pinch, not a testing grip. A full, deliberate crushing that went on for long enough that I stopped trying to pull away and started trying not to make a sound. When he let go, he said the soup was cold anyway. Patricia came downstairs in her bathrobe, drawn by the noise. She saw my face and she looked away. That hurt almost worse than the pain in my arm. I cleaned the bowl. I wiped down the table. I went to bed, and I lay there in the dark, looking at the bruises forming on my skin like a time-lapse photograph of decay. The next morning, Lawrence was different. He was the sort of different that comes from shame and fear mixing together. He knocked on my bedroom door and came in before I could answer. "My wife is coming to lunch," he said. "Her mother. They're having a girls' lunch thing." I need you to cover those bruises. Wear long sleeves. And Henrietta, he used my full name, which he never did. I need you to smile, to be pleasant, to not embarrass me. Can you do that? I'd spent 70 years being pleasant. I'd spent 70 years covering things up. I'd watched my husband build an empire while I raised our son and made soup. I'd kept his secret without complaint. I'd nodded and smiled and done what was asked of me. But something happened in me that morning. Maybe it was the bruises. Maybe it was the way he said my full name like I was an employee who'd made a mistake. Maybe it was the fact that he was asking me to participate in my own erasure. I told him I would have to think about it. What I actually did was get dressed, put on a cardigan to cover the bruises, and drive straight to Parkfield Construction's offices downtown. I hadn't been there in 3 years. The last time, George had taken me on a tour and shown me the awards on the walls, plaques with Waters' name on them and his name, but not mine. Never mine. George's office was on the 3rd floor. His assistant tried to stop me, but she recognized me. She always had been kind to me. She let me through. George was sitting at his desk, reading something on his computer. He looked up when I came in, and his face went soft in a way that Waters used to, like he was looking at someone he loved. "Henrietta," he said, "is everything all right?" I rolled up my sleeve. I watched his face as he saw the bruises. I watched it move through confusion and into something worse. Recognition. He knew what this meant. He knew who had done it. And I watched him understand that his partner's widow had not come to his office to make small talk. "George," I said, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to call my son to your office. I need him to walk in here and find me sitting in this chair. And I need you to understand that I'm done being quiet." Lawrence arrived 15 minutes later. He was confused at first. He made a joke about emergency meetings. He sat down across from me, and only then did he see me clearly. I don't remember exactly what I said. I remember my voice sounding steady. I remember rolling up my sleeve again and letting him see what he'd done. I remember telling him that his father had built Parkfield with George Adler, and that his father had left his share to me, and that for 5 years I had watched him work in a company that I owned, and that the only reason I was still breathing at all was because I had never needed him to know it. "You no longer work here," I told him, "effective immediately." He tried to speak. He tried several times. His mouth opened and closed like something caught. I don't think he could quite grasp that the rules had changed, that the person he'd pushed around was not who he thought she was. George called security, not to remove me, to remove Lawrence. I learned later that Patricia left him within the week. The money had stopped, and that seemed to matter more than the questions about why. The police came because George insisted on pressing charges. Lawrence lost his job, his wife, and his good name. The local news picked it up. "Elder abuse at major construction firm," they wrote. "Son charged with assault on 70-year-old mother." He wanted to apologize. He sent letters from his lawyer. I never opened them. I took an active role at Parkfield after that. George had wanted to retire for years, and I finally let him. I restructured some things. I made sure my son's crime became part of the company's training on workplace violence and respect. I donated funds to an organization that helps elderly people in abusive situations. I did this not with anger, but with the kind of quiet certainty that comes from knowing you have both the power and the right. What people don't understand about silence is that it's not weakness. Silence is a choice. It's a weapon you keep sharpened and ready, waiting for the moment when speaking will matter most. I had been silent for 70 years, and when I finally spoke, I spoke with the weight of a company, a legacy, and a whole life that my son never knew existed. He wanted me to cover up the bruises and smile. Instead, I let them show, and with them, everything else. That's what I learned. Sometimes the soup isn't about salt. Sometimes it's about deciding whether you'll keep seasoning your life to suit someone else's taste, or whether you'll finally let people see you as you really are. I'm 70 years old, and I'm only just beginning to live.